Automation and Compliance Made Easy. Wanted to remind everyone that this is a live webinar today. So we are streaming live, me and Dan Gert. Say hey, Dan.
Hey, Jesse.
If you're joining, look over there on your screen. There will be a chat. There's a Q&A section. You can fire off things, hopefully nice things for me and Dan to read as we go through our discussion. Go ahead and, if you will, as you join, I'll ask you again in a minute, go ahead and just type in your name, where you're from, and say, hey. My name is Jesse, Chief Technologist here at D-Zone, and I'll be your host for the discussion today. You've already met Dan Gert, CEO of Flexagon. Dan, welcome. And today, we're going to explore how automation and compliance is shaping the future of DevOps, especially in Oracle environments. So as we get started, right, I want to kick things off by looking at the big picture, okay? DevOps adoption continues to grow, right? Complexity is still a challenge, though, Dan, especially in enterprise environments where Oracle applications are critical. A recent survey showed that over 70% of organizations using Oracle struggle with lengthy deployment cycles, manual processes, and issues with compliance. At the same time, automation is becoming a game changer, right? Companies that have embraced DevOps automation report a 60% reduction in deployment failures and a 2x increase in release speed, right? This is pretty cool, Dan. So before we get into Flex Deploy specifically, I did want to fire off a poll on, for all of you out there, like, what technologies are you using right now? So if a poll's going to kind of show up on your screen, answer it, once we get the results, we'll probably address that. But Dan, for you, how are you seeing these trends play out across industries? I mean, are companies really prioritizing automation, or is compliance the bigger driver?
Yeah, great way to tee it up, Jesse. Basically, one of the foundational aspects of DevOps, and probably most people know this, but it is automation. And so, what does automation drive? Speed, quality, productivity. And it really doesn't matter what what tech you're working within. You might be building web apps or using containers, or really dealing with some of the space that we talk about today, right? Oracle or others like SAP and Salesforce. So automation, it ultimately is a means to an end. And so one of those ends is compliance, or easier compliance. And so, regardless of industry, public, private sector, companies, they're all continuing to focus on automation.
Oh, yeah.
And, although compliance has been important for a long time, I'm sure you've seen it the same way. Over the last couple of years, it's really going through the roof, so skyrocketing. And we in many cases we see the industry in general and those coming into Flexagon leading with that. And so why is that? So they're focused on or having the pressure of dealing with SOC compliance or ISO or other type of regulation. So to achieve that, it's really, and achieve it efficiently, that is compliance. Without automation, that makes it really tough. So automation really becomes the basis for just about everything.
Yeah, it has to be. And look, whether it's SOC 2, Type 2, SSAE, ISO 27001, GDPR, CCPA, Nevada's got one now, and Daniel's law, you name it, compliance is a pain in the rear end for people. And the number one way to get out of some of that, agreed, is some automation. So we do have some what technologies you're using responses back. So it looks like about 20% of everyone online is using some kind of Oracle Fusion application, whether it's the ERP, HCM, SCM. About 20% on SAP. We've got HANA and ECC. 40% definitely on the web app side, and then 20% on cloud native. So good mix. Right, good mix, but a lot of work.
Good mix.
Awesome. Yeah, so I have to ask, because it's a good story. But what inspired the development of Flex Deploy? Right, how has its vision kind of evolved to address this unique need around Oracle application users?
Yeah, well, we just celebrated our 10 years here at Flexagon. It was a nice milestone, and I'll tell you what. Some of us, the founders of the company, we're dealing with, basically the nightmares of working with these complicated ecosystems. So we're going to talk about Oracle, but you could say the same with Salesforce and SAP and or what have you. And we were in the throes of dealing with that in some huge implementations over a number of years. And the amount of pressure and stress and impact it had to the business, as well as personally to our families, was incredible. Right. And we said, okay, we built a lot of tools ourselves, kind of internally. We've used a lot of commercial tools and things just weren't good enough. Right. And we said, we're going to get after it and we're going to change this because, nobody, should have to deal with these call them ineffective ways to develop and deliver solutions here. And so Oracle just happens to be one of those spaces that we were playing in.
Yeah, and they're huge, they're complicated, they're hard, and making that easier made your own life easier, but also made for a lot of other people to make a difference for them too, which I think is pretty awesome. The other thing is listen, there's a lot of DevOps tools in the space for streamlining stuff. Like, what sets what y'all did apart from everybody else?
Really, it's because of the fact that we were looking at and working with Oracle technology, IBM, Salesforce. There's an underlying change that was needed really from a technology standpoint at a platform level to be able to deal with hundreds and thousands and whatever code and configuration changes all moving along with lots of teams involved. And so the differentiation had to be at the platform level. And so we built a platform literally at the ground level. And so we're talking Oracle today, of course, but any of these ecosystems or open source or cloud native, we built at the plumbing level how you can work with these, what we call it a package-based model. But ultimately it's some design techniques, if you will, that are embedded within Flex Deploy. Secondly is really the integration of the tool chain. So in a lot of cases, we felt as though there wasn't a truly seamless end-to-end process, whether you're a developer, release manager, or whatever. And so that integration across that tool chain was very important. And then, last but not least is now Oracle and its traditional technologies, or Oracle and its cloud technologies, are vastly different from each other, not to mention different from Salesforce or whatever. So the idea of building in the capability that knows specifically about how these technologies work, right, at a very detailed level, allows you to get out of the muck and really elevate where you're spending your time. So it's those three things that I think are the big differentiators.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to dig deeper. But before we do, a little lighthearted question. As we're talking about automation, if you could automate one thing in your personal life, not your work life, in your personal life, what would it be?
Well, considering we just got, about a foot of snow here recently, and I was out there breaking my back with a shovel for a couple hours. How about automating snow removal in some more effective way than I was doing it? That
Gotcha.
Maybe not all that as exciting as these automation in Oracle space, but it would help.
Listen, it's not that far. That's not that far. They've got those automated lawnmowers now, right? So, automated snow removal. You sit in there, a cup of coffee, and just kind of do that. I think that would be cool. All right. So for any of you out there who are live, what would you automate? Right. What are some things that you might automate in your life? Just put it in there in the chat for us. So I want to shift gears a little bit, understand how Flex Deploy is tackling those challenges we just, talked about. At a high level, how, right? We've discussed kind of like the background and why and what, but how does Flex Deploy help streamline DevOps for Oracle applications and infrastructure?
Yeah, it really is a couple things, and maybe bridging off the comments I made a little bit earlier in terms of, from the ground up, building the company and building Flex Deploy to be able to work with these more complicated environments. It's really a few different things, and maybe break it into, the automation side, and then talk a little bit about the compliance side, just since those are two aspects that we're focusing on here.
Yeah, great.
I think really the automation side, Right. It's foundational for DevOps in general. And so, that significantly increases when you're talking about not only one or two of these traditional and cloud applications, for example, for Oracle, but it's the middleware, it's the business intelligence, the database, it's how you're building your custom applications. And so when you get a mixture of those involved, that's one thing that'll amp that up. And so our customers are dealing with hundreds and thousands of these customizations, configurations, code, data, metadata, all of those things that typically they're just manually moving across these test and production environments. And so what FlexDeploy does is, at the core of it, eliminates all that manual activities. Mm-hmm. Right? It just eliminates all of them. So with a low code platform, a little bit of configuration, we're seeing customers really cutting the delivery times by say 60%, or in many cases even more. And so really, as I alluded to, it's pre-built workflows, traditional Oracle database applications like eBusiness Suite, as well as all of the cloud apps, infrastructure, and some of us still call platform services, those sorts of things. So the out of the box where we do that engineering to eliminate all of that stuff. And so really that's, back to the uniquely positioning aspect of this, FlexDeploy can discover all of those changes, package them up, deploy them, automate all of that. And so what do you get, right? You get the speed with quality, of course. You need the quality or the speed, doesn't matter. And it's really that repeatable development and delivery life cycle, something that you're going to get it there, you're going to be responsive to the business, and it's going to get there every single time. So there's that, maybe the automation play. On the governance side, governance and compliance. And in the beginning, I think of governance and controls, right? That stuff is just built into FlexDeploy as well. One key aspect of that are the release pipeline. So you've got the pipeline that's going to shepherd change across some number of stages into a live environment. And you get that at no additional effort, okay? That includes that seamless integration with the tool chain. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So whether that's agile planning, source control, test, automation, security automation, service management, all of that woven together very, very seamlessly, okay? Cool. And then I guess not last but not least, there's visibility to everything. So you've got reports, dashboards, ways of getting notified. So there's no more reacting to stuff, right? You get things served up in a way that you can make decisions on it, informed decisions. And so that's troubleshooting, continuous improvement, and then, of course, the compliance piece of what we're talking about today.
That's huge. I want to talk just for a second about legacy, right? And listen, I come from a place like in the early 90s, we had build engineers who were hand building our products, pulling out, there was no DevOps pipelines, and, we were trying to script things, but, it brings into focus kind of how far we've come, but we still have a long way to go. In some places, they still have to figure out how to modernize their DevOps pipeline. Like, can you share an example of how FlexDeploy helps along those lines to like modernize these pipelines for people? It sounds like it'll be a good fit.
Yeah. Oh, I think it is. And I think even bridging back to your earlier comment, I still remember back in the 90s building OS and middleware for one of the large providers. If you fast forward the movie by decade, right, these problems have continued. And even right now, they're as big and bad as ever. And I think maybe a good example is Heathrow Airport. So you ask, what is a specific example? They were going through and now have successfully went through a massive transformation. I know we use that term loosely in many cases, but it was, and it started literally in the pandemic, where they made the decision to say, in the throes of a huge challenge, at least certainly in that industry, a little bit, how are we going to deal with these things? And they knew that they had been using a lot of call it legacy, long-running technology, a lot of it from Oracle, and they said, we're going to retire our existing systems. In this case, it was Oracle eBusiness Suite, and we're moving to the cloud, lock, stock, and barrel. We're going to use their Fusion applications, and we're going to use a bunch of their other infrastructure around that. And so they had struggled for a lot of years with keeping up with the business, right? So the business wanted to move, and they just couldn't keep up. And so they said, okay, when we are transforming, right, IT needs to transform. Right. This is a business transformation, but you need to transform to be able to do these things. And so fortunately, we worked with a really good partner of ours, Capgemini, and they led that implementation using Flex Deploy and really that full transition to the Oracle Cloud. So they automated all their deployments of code, the configurations, the business intelligence, integration cloud. So how they wired all these things together was a big deal. And then some significant custom apps that they had. They happen to be built on Oracle Apex. And so that, talk about extensive automation, that really provided Heathrow what they needed to do to transform their IT. They increased their development and delivery by 2x. Deployment errors were down by over 90%. Those large magnitudes improvement. And, sitting here, it's exciting to be able to watch, Heathrow and talk to those guys and see how much it's really modernized, the tech, if you will, but most importantly, help their business be much more effective.
Awesome. Well, and we've got some new people joining, so welcome to you all who are joining. And this is live, so say hey in the chat, write a question in the Q&A. But as we go forward, before we move to the next thing, I did, as moderator, feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't poke a little bit. So we talked a little bit about how cool the Heathrow story was, but what about like measurement, right? We have some engineering minds out there. Do you have an example of something like a tangible measurement on they improved, X percent or X much or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, there's a lot of numbers we throw after them. I'll tell you one of the things that has struck me, and as a matter of fact, it was just a couple weeks ago, I was talking to Uber, one of our customers, and they came to us saying, we need a solution. And it was really driven around compliance. They said, the automation is wonderful. We love that, faster, better, cheaper, but give us something to help with compliance, because they had been spending on average a couple hundred hours. They had these monthly cycles, a couple hundred hours, up to almost 400 hours to crank out the complex, reports, and they were wiring all that together manually. And so fast forward the movie, they were able to achieve that, and those 200 hours, per audit type of situation went down to literally zero. And they went so far as to say, not only is the compliance there and can somebody log in an audit or whatever, but we can just automatically ship them out what they need and they're good to go. So when we're talking a couple hundred hours per month, just for that specific piece, right, what that's able to do in the broader sense is they're scaling their business, applying FlexDeploy is pretty meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an engineering guy. So when you throw out things like 200 hours, I calculate, how many man months of effort that is and how much time is getting saved. And you add on top of that, like, just the pipelines you add on top of that, savings for compliance and savings for automation starts to add up. So it becomes something that's worth it. I just wanted to make sure I asked the question, this isn't 60 minutes, but I did have to, get to something a little tangible.
Sure.
But, if we look into the whole, enterprise, right? Big roadblocks for enterprises, especially in regulated industries. We've already said it's compliance. It's a huge deal. Right. All being compliant is just a pain a lot of times. And it's sometimes hard to know when you're not in compliance. So there's this huge tension between speed and market and governance. Right. So there's always a tension there between engineering and business and, the oversight and governance committees. So like how does Flex Deploy help with that challenge, or does it?
Yeah, no, you're right, Jesse. It's there's always that tension between speed and governance, and so somewhat I mentioned a little bit of this earlier. Back to the repeated automation being the foundation that anchors things like governance and makes that easy. That's absolutely the truth. And so, but beyond automation, there's several key things that you want to think about and FlexDeploy helps with. So first is that reusable release pipeline. All right. So embedding the governance, controls, and risk management into that pipeline is essential. All right. So putting gates in there. It might be as simple as schedule gates. So we can schedule on the hour deployments or daily or whatever. Approvals, security checks, functional tests, quality checks. So embedding that in and making that just fall over easy. Okay. Second is the integration of the process. So the process in many cases is the tool chain. So, in addition to FlexPloy having a lot of native capabilities, so how do you manage your secrets and do that very securely? Those things are native, agile planning, service management. So there's a lot that you can do out of the box as native capabilities within the platform, but there's also a very robust integration framework. I like to call it the fabric that has out-of-the-box integrations with popular open source and commercial tools. So the Jira's, Azure Board, ServiceNow, just many across the board. So so really that results in a very nicely integrated and seamless end-to-end governance and compliance as well. So that enables that to happen. And then I guess one key piece is or maybe the last point here is, because FlexPloy is automating and governing and managing all of that, it's capturing all of that data, right? And sticking in this big common data model. And so that's really the basis for all of that reporting, dashboards and those types of things. And audits become just a snap. I mean, just easy. And so when you roll it up, think of governance and compliance as out of the box. Right, and the customers just love this stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you were talking about where do you store your secrets? You can't make a joke. I mean, not GitHub is the answer.
Exactly. Right.
True. All right. So
very true.
Yeah, it's and everybody out there knows the joke. But what are some common pitfalls that companies run into? And how does the automation help them stay ahead? I love the reporting and all that stuff, talking through compliance, but what about some things to look out for?
Yeah. Lots of pitfalls here. It might seem rudimentary because it's been back in the 90s when you were, referencing your stuff or what have you. It might be rudimentary, but maybe it's not. Simple things like segregation of duties. I mean, it is still a challenge where you have developers, admins, others just making these code and configuration changes and such in different environments and causing just a massive issue there. And so need that to be controlled. And so FlexPloy, a really nice fine-grained role-based security model. So it's just woven into the lower level workflows, the pipelines, the things that make it easy to put those controls in place. Let's see, another pitfall maybe disjointed processes. Okay, disjointed. We might say tool chains, but what does that look like, and how does that impact governance and compliance? And it does in a big way. So what we, basically, can you prove that we apply the right quality, security, those other checks that'll give you that high quality, low risk delivery that we're all looking for? And so that's a big pitfall. And when you're just rolling your own and piecemealing things together, that doesn't work so well. And so FlexPloy addresses that by along the lines of what I mentioned earlier. So it's embedded in, right? Embed those activities, integrate that into the process across all those different areas. And so that's a big deal. Maybe I think it's the pitfall and the strategy, to address all the manual activities. So sometimes we can't get everything, right? Sometimes there are manual activities that it just doesn't make sense to automate at any given point in time, but you still need to incorporate those into the process, manual or not. And so so what we've done there is make it really easy to orchestrate all of that manual activity, those human tasks, as part of the process. So you can pick those up as part of the ultimately the compliance and your reporting. So it's woven in, and then very importantly, it's a never-ending process. We always talk about the DevOps journey and the maturity and those sorts of things, but it really is the case. And FlexPloy is built from the ground up to be able to deal with that. So as a strategy, you go off and solve your problems, you mature that, and then and then improve things over time. And then part of this ends up being, eliminating those challenges with compliance.
That's perfect. All right. Well, for those of you who have joined, this is live. So, type in the chat, ask a question. I'm going to move us along because this is like my favorite part of our talk. And I know a lot of the people tuning in are going to want it too, because nothing speaks louder than real world results. Okay. So I do want the team to fire off a poll for people out there. Like, what's the biggest challenge that you all out there face in your CI/CD workflows? And Dan, as we're getting results, take a couple minutes. Can you walk us through a case study, like real things, right?
Yeah.
Where a company saw significant improvements after adopting Flex Deploy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the example before with Heathrow complements this example. Maybe I'll give with H&I. So H&I, U.S. based furniture manufacturer. They had a very complicated IT set of applications and infrastructure. There was lots of Oracle, Informatica, Microsoft, Salesforce, all sorts of these things moving around. And their strategy, they had got a new CIO in, and they adopted a couple things, cloud first, but then a massive shift to the cloud. And so, and they're going very rapidly. All right, and they're moving a large portion of this to Oracle Cloud, Cloud SaaS and infrastructure. So a combination of adopting net new technology, SaaS and otherwise, and then lifting and shifting stuff. And so they had a team of people that were in the business of writing their own scripts, building their own tools, and the fear and the concern and why they came to Flexagon initially was they said this couldn't scale. Right, we're throwing people and bodies at this thing, and the importance of this overall move to the cloud and this shift in strategy, it was just too massive. So they fast forward the movie, they implemented Flex Deploy for anywhere from their traditional technology like Oracle E-Business Suite. They adopted a bunch of cloud services initially, for example, the Oracle Integration Cloud, lots and lots of other things, while also applying it into the Microsoft space, Informatica, adopting Salesforce right now, as a matter of fact. But the last time we sat down with them and we looked at the results, so back to your, what are the tangible results? The numbers that they gave were, they're pretty staggering. 98% reduction in deployment-related errors. 98%. And that's after having a team of people working on this stuff. Another one, so that was 98%. This one drops a bit, but 90% reduction in audit review time. Being able to just take this stuff and just make it fall down easy. And then from a productivity side of the world, it's 80% productivity gain. So removing lots of manual tasks gave them a real nice productivity bump.
That's huge. Those are huge numbers. Was not expecting that. Yeah. What advice would you give to a company kind of just starting out on its DevOps automation journey? Like, how do you get started? Where do you focus first? We'll have some people watching that are maybe not as advanced. Like, how do they get started?
Yeah, well, one of the things, maybe I'll back into this. You hear time and time again, after customers have been using Flex Deploy for a couple of years or whatever, it's how do we live without this? Why didn't we do this, 5 years ago? And so, this whole notion of wishful thinking, quit wishing, right? My recommendation is to build a business case, start tracking. Where are you spending the time, right? How much time are you spending deploying across these environments? Right. When you have a problem, there's a failure, how much time are you spending figuring those out? Not just in production, but in test environments, right? And look at what you're doing at code, configurations, metadata changes. Track that stuff. Right, as well as, like we mentioned, the Uber example before, whatever, the audit processes. So track those things as well. The reason I say start out there is that it makes it easy. In many cases, very easy to build a case. So then you can go through that, and rather than talking about it, and then later wishful thinking, you get after it. Okay, so then maybe another maybe another relatively obvious point is you get after that low-hanging fruit. And so it doesn't matter, so we're talking Oracle today mainly. It doesn't really matter that you might be working on the traditional tech, the Oracle business suites of the world, middleware, database, or you might be all the way down into the cloud dealing with SaaS applications or integration cloud, or pick your favorite set of cloud services. It doesn't really even matter, but there's so much automation that you can just pick out of that. I mean, specifically when you're using Flexploit, because we've done all the engineering underneath that. But those, that low-hanging fruit can be picked very rapidly, and then you can evolve that over time. And so, the other cool part about it is once you get this automation in place, some of that low-hanging fruit, some of the things like automated rollbacks. People always want to be able to roll back. In many cases, they roll forward, but if you want to roll back, you can roll back. You get that for free. These things in the Oracle world, and they're beyond Oracle, but you refresh an environment. You might call it cloning an environment. Well, now that messes things up. How do I get that back into the right state? Well, you get that for free just by automating those, or compliance. Back to our discussion a little earlier, a lot of that stuff comes with no additional work. So maybe those few items are a good way to think about getting started.
Very cool. All right, so we've got, we're trying to, wrap this up in maybe about 5 minutes, but I do have a question. For everyone out there, if you have a question, put it in our Q&A. We'll answer them as we go along. How does Flexagon plan to stay ahead of the curve amidst the rapid advancements in DevOps and cloud infrastructure? Good question.
Good question. I like that. Pat yourself on the back. I love it. It is a good question. And I'll tell you, I think stepping back strategically. So strategically, Flexagon is in a buy and build type of strategy as a company.
Okay.
And so, I mentioned starting the company. We celebrated our 10 years here recently. And we built everything organically, but we've made a shift over the last year, and we've said, while we continue to build out capabilities, right, organically from the ground up, we're also looking at buy and building. So how can we more rapidly bring value to market by acquiring and integrating? And so there's some selectivity there and some things to watch out for that we'll be getting after. And so basically it speeds up the ability to stay ahead of that curve, like you mentioned, across cloud services, infrastructure services, the whole works.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, a lot of this stuff changes really quick. So, knowing how you guys, do the dance makes a big difference, right? All right, so we have just a few minutes left. It's a fantastic conversation. Loads of stories. I love all of that. But before we wrap up, I do have one final question. Like, where do you see the future of this going? Like, look out, Dan's crystal ball, right? You sit as the visionary, CEO, all these things. If you look out over the next year and beyond, like, what's coming next in this area?
Yeah, well, it's a few things. I think the good news, and I don't know, it's not necessarily a visionary statement up front here, but I think there's a neat situation that's been occurring over the last couple of years, where there's been enough focus, enough attention, and I would argue mainly because of the pain that was there and has been there, to drive the focus for DevOps, things like DevOps, CI/CD, Agile, and make that just very intentionally focused on these complicated, business technology ecosystems. So Oracle, Salesforce, SAP, and the like. So it's taken a while before that attention has really got there. But now if you look at, talk with Gartner and Forrester, they're even stepping up and delivering research that's saying you have to pay attention, right? These complicated things that are in many cases at the core of the business need to elevate and from a DevOps standpoint be at that. And so I think, in that broader sense, that recognition the challenge and the opportunity to help customers with Oracle, is a big deal. And so as we look here, at Flexagon and Flex Deploy, whether it's extending the platform very rapidly and some additional capability in our organic approach, or acquiring into applying things like AI and other things, given the comments I made earlier as it relates to this massive data model that underlies Flex Deploy and the intelligence and the insights that can give. There's a lot of really neat things that are out there as we continue to extend call it a comprehensive and integrated end-to-end DevOps platform that can work for anything, but then is really tailored in nicely to these systems like Oracle and Salesforce and the like. So I think just lots of really neat things coming here.
All right, so I'm kind of interested, at least in the AI stuff, but we're running out of time, so I'm not going to ask a ton of questions. But I do have a question. Everybody who's joined in, welcome. We've had a couple more join. Where can they go if they want to learn more about Flex Deploy, whether it's the AI or the automation or compliance? Like, where can they go?
Yeah, well, a few things come to mind. One is go to the website, right? We have a lot of good information for self-service. There's these pages for these interactive demos that allow you to drive by yourself, drive Flex Deploy around, get some insights on what it is and how it works and why it's of value, those sorts of things. We typically have more, live webinars and those sorts of things. Ask to schedule a demo, reach out. There's easy ways to do that. Or maybe even short term, if you're on the road or if you live in Europe, happen to be in London next week, we'll be there at Oracle Cloud World London. So that's on March 20th. So some short-term activities for anybody who wants to take a vacation or happens to live in that area.
I am going to miss you by like 3 days. I'm heading out that way to Wales, so I'll miss you by 3 days. All right, and check Q&A. Again, just before we wrap up, look through the Q&A, see if there's anything. Let's see. Here's one. This is kind of cool. What is the most rewarding aspect of leading Flexagon? Okay, it's cool. You're a leader. In its mission to innovate DevOps.
Well, okay, I'm going to take this. Maybe what comes to mind is back to the beginning of what you asked about. How Flexagon was started, and the short answer is the impact on people's lives, because clearly there's an impact on the business and the business outcomes and your ability to serve the business much better than in the past. But when you see it at the individual level, at development teams, the administrators, these people and the impact it has on them, now that's meaningful to me as well.
That's cool. Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap than on that statement. As we, we're all business, either participants or leaders, and affecting the people in their everyday lives. So that's what we do, right? And I think that's awesome. But that's a wrap for us today. We're out of time. Dan, thanks so much for your insights. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to all of you out there. Yeah, for joining us. Keep an eye out for follow-up materials coming out of this. And of course, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Until next time, thank you, take care, and happy automating.